Oh hey, welcome to the third episode of Dapps Simplified. In this episode, we'll continue from where we left off in the previous episode and learn how to assign types for React context and the providers. So let's get going. We'll be building on top of our project from the previous episode. To follow along, you can fork the Typescript template from its link in the description. Instead, if you'd like to dribble with the finished project, you can find the link to another Typescript project. Now let's quickly recap the project which we did in our previous episode. We started out with Typescript Next starter project and then we created two files. In useConnection.tsx, we used React's createContext function to create an empty context. We also created a helper function to retrieve the context. Inside ConnectionProvider.tsx, we imported the connection context and then we created a React component called ConnectionProvider to initialize the connection to Solana blockchain and to create a connection context.provider, which is a provider for the React context to be able to share the connection object with any of the React component in the component tree. Then inside index.tsx, we use the connection provider component, which then initializes the connection object and connects to the Solana blockchain. And this is evident from the console log of the connection object. Now let's move on to add types to our context and providers. While creating the context using React's createContext, we haven't used any type. As a consequence, while using the context provider, you can send value of any type. There is no restriction. Now, let's go back and create a type for the context provider's value so that we can bank on Typescript for the type checking. Let's create an interface to assign type for the context value and name it as connection context state. Again, it's a good convention to name the type for the context as context state. This improves the readability since the context state is the holder for the state or the value of the context provider. This is the connection object which we need to pass as the state in the React context. Hence, we need to add its type inside the connection context state. Let's create a property called connection and assign its type to the connection object. Since the type is defined inside Solana/web3.js, we need to import it. Let's just quickly import this. Let's set the type of the context to match connection context state. We also set the default value to empty object. The useConnection helper function is used to retrieve the state from the connection context. Since the connection context is now typed, we can also assign the context state type while we retrieve the context. We've hard-coded a Solana network address api.devnet.solana.com to connect to the devnet. What if we want to retain the flexibility of being able to connect to mainnet or the testnet? Hence, instead of hard-coding the network address, let's parameterize them using the props. Let's add another prop called endpoint. We have two props, children and endpoint. Let's add a type to represent these props. Let's create an interface and name it as connection provider props. Again, it's a nice to have naming convention to name your props after the React components themselves. For instance, if you were to have a React component called myObject, the props could be named as myObjectProps. Now we have two props. One is the children, and the children in any React component are of type React node. So let's import React node from React and add its type, and the endpoint is of type string. So now we've created a type for both the props. We need the type FC, which is a shorthand for functional component to be able to type the props for the React component. Now let's assign the type FC and wrap the generic with connection provider props. There has been an ongoing debate in the TypeScript community whether using functional component is the best approach to type your React components. Especially when the children components are involved, it doesn't do much harm. We'll keep this debate for another day. Now let's move on by using functional component as the approach to type or React props. Let's add a default value so that if no value is provided with the props, the default value kicks in. Previously, we hard-coded the value of Solana Devnet. Now, let's use the Devnet URL as the de facto value. We have our connection provider component ready, and let's take it for a spin. To begin with, how about we give a dummy URL, literally a dummy URL, and see what happens. Remind you that the Solana network is actually a JSON RPC WebSocket server, the JavaScript library web3. And these components act as the JSON RPC WebSocket clients. Obviously, given a dummy URL, the connection to the JSON RPC web server should fail. And let's find the reason for the failure from the logs. As you could see, the JSON RPC WebSocket client says that the URL address is not valid. Let's begin the address with HTTP or HTTPS. And we could see from the logs that the address of the socket is ws/dummy, and of course this connection fails and the connection object does not contain the methods, functionalities and the variables it should have. Let's just remove this dummy URL, and as we know, we have a default value for the endpoint. If we do not provide a prop value, the default value should kick in and the connection to the devnet should be successful. Let's see if the connection with the devnet is successful. As you could see, the connection to the Solana Dev network indeed works. Hope you all enjoyed this video. In the next episode, we'll see how to create multiple hierarchy of React components and pass the connection object through them using the connection. We'll also see how to use the connection object to retrieve basic information about the blockchain. We'll also learn how to share the connection object throughout your next application by wrapping up the app object or the root component. Keep learning, subscribe to the channel, and goodbye.